It's 2 after 4, so we should start, or I should start. You're not allowed to take any pictures while I'm talking unless if you trash me. You can take pictures if you're nice. Okay. And yes, I did say that on camera. So there. So this is about me. Again, I work with a company called SQL Skills. If you've heard of SQL Skills, you've probably heard of my cohorts, who are Kimberly Tripp and Paul Randall, rather than myself. She's fairly famous, and they're fairly famous in the SQL Server space. I have email. You can write me an email with questions, and that's my Twitter account if you want to harass me in person. But if you trash the talk, include me on the list, right? Somebody did that this morning, and it's like, they didn't include me on the list. I found out the hard way. Okay, so I've written a bunch of books, and then one of the books got popular, and I went off to teach. Microsoft let me teach there for a while. And so I haven't written a book since then, except I did write the 2012 internals chapter in Kayla Mullane's book last time. But if you were at the talk this morning, you already heard of that, and it's about me anyway. Let's start to talk about the talk. So I'm going to do a talk about SQL Server choices. And the premise is, at this point in time, if you're going to move the database to the cloud, which is the thing everybody always wonders if you're going to do, you have 2 choices. You have the choice to move to Microsoft Azure SQL Database. Remember, they just changed the name of that recently? So it used to be SQL Azure Database. Then it used to be Windows Azure SQL Database. Then last week they changed everything that was Windows Azure to Microsoft Azure. So the name of that product actually is Microsoft Azure SQL Database. But they've changed it so many times, I didn't change my slides this time yet. So there. And Microsoft Azure SQL Database is actually part of something called Platform as a Service. In this world, there's Infrastructure as a Service, which means we'll put up a bunch of VMs and let you have at it. There's Platform as a Service, which means we'll take part of our platform and commoditize it and put it out there, and you can subscribe to our service. And there's Software as a Service, which means you can write your own software and you can market it yourself. One of the things that I was fairly surprised to see is if you go out and make an Azure VM now, actually I wasn't surprised, I knew it was coming, you can make an Azure VM with Oracle on it. But having said that, because it takes maybe 10 or 15 minutes to make an Azure VM, and I wanted to actually show you both in real time, right? Let's actually go up and start the VM up, so when we need the VM, we're going to have it. So this is Azure, and I can actually log on that way. It may not ask me to log on because I told them to save my credentials, and indeed it doesn't. It's logging itself on now. I mean, it didn't ask me to log on. So you don't get the whole experience that way, right? So you go out and you can get a 30-day free trial. I'm not trying to plug this, right? You go out and you can get a 30-day free trial. And with a 30-day free trial, you can log on, and I don't even know if you have to have your credit card anymore. You used to have your credit card, but you can log on for 30 days and you can do whatever you want with it. When you get that, it's tied to your Windows account. If you have Windows 8, you know what a Windows account is. It used to be your live account. So it's tied to your Windows account. So what it normally would do is actually put up my Windows account username and tell me to log in with my Windows account password. And so once you're up in Azure, you can own things in Azure. And so this is a list of all the, give me 2 seconds. There. This is a list of all the things that I own in Azure right now. So I own a storage account called BBAUCH, that's my first initial and my last name. Oh, come on, don't do that, Mr. Zoomin. And the storage account is actually on a subscription I have, and it's located in the West US, which is where I live. But I knew I was going to be speaking here, and so I made up one, BBAUCHUEU, and that one is actually in the same subscription, and it's in Ireland. Northern Europe is Ireland to them, and Western Europe, I believe, is Amsterdam. I forget where all their different data centers is. Well, it's as west as they go, right? Okay. So storage accounts are just where you put files. And then I also have a second account. So I actually got free accounts. If you have MSDN, you actually have a free account, and I'm actually part of a partner program where I get a free account. I shouldn't say that on camera. They're going to go, you have too many free accounts. But for MSDN, you get a free account with $150 free worth every month. And the nice thing about that is that in preparing for this stuff, I have to be up there all the time. And I've never really used more than $15 or $20 a month. So I didn't even come close. And if you have a free account or a trial account, you can have it say, if I run out of money, just don't do any more for money, right? Cut my account off at that point. So anyway, I'm not trying to plug it, I'm trying to tell you how it works, right? I'm not going to do value judgment, okay? And I also have, and I don't know, they did this without my knowledge, and I'm not paying for it, an Active Directory account for the SQL Skills Active Directory domain, which is interesting because I didn't know there was one. And that's actually shared by all the SQL Skills people, and it's in the US, okay? So one of the choices you have right now is to run SQL Server on a virtual machine. In fact, yesterday they just shipped SQL Server 2014, and so we were all waiting for it to download it so we would not put it on our machine to make sure it didn't ruin the conference. But I downloaded it, but the first thing I did was actually go look for it on Azure, because you must remember that the current CEO of Microsoft, the new one, is actually from Azure and from the server division. So you'd figure that he might want to put it on Azure first. So I want a VM, there's a VM, and hopefully it won't actually run off the page because this is fairly low resolution. And I'm going to create a new VM, there we go right here. And then VM, you get a choice of quick create or a VM from the gallery. There's also a series of VMs that are contributed, the people contribute. They're Linux VMs, Linux-based, with various and sundry pieces of software on them. The reason they're Linux-based is, of course, people can't contribute VMs with their Windows OS on them because that's a bought product. And when you make one of these VMs, you pay so much a minute or so much an hour or something for the product. So from the gallery, I can basically choose one of these VMs and send it down. They are finally up to SQL Server 2014. There it is. Is that visible okay? Can everybody see that all right? In the back? Yeah, maybe somewhat? Okay, good. So notice you can get just the data center or the OS. You can get one with a SharePoint trial on it, and you can get one with a Windows 2014 RTM, and that's the one I want. Let's just do that with Enterprise. There it is. And by the way, just so that you didn't really think I was making this up, I can also choose one with Visual Studio on it. So I've seen somebody that their Visual Studio got trashed right before the conference. So they took the demos, made a VM, uploaded them to the VM, and nobody knew better. And here's one for different Oracle VMs. So you can get an Oracle WebLogic server or an Oracle, database. So if you want to play with Oracle database and you don't want to bother to install it, by the way, they used to run setup on Windows. You can do it this way too. And basically they charge you so much by the minute. And then all the different Linux servers that you could possibly want. Okay, but what I want is I want one with SQL Server 2014 in it, because I'm going to get back to it later to show you how much like SQL Server it is. So I'll do that, pick that one. Oh, and I'm going to go scroll bar crazy, I bet. There we go. So where's the button, guys? There's supposed to be a button here that I can push now. Oh, I know, there's supposed to be a thing across the bottom. But because there it is, you see it? Because it's low resolution, I have to actually tap it like that. Oh, come on. Don't do Azure demos in low resolution, apparently, Bob. There, see, you see the numbers at the bottom? So I should be able to hit this and go on to the next page. Are you not going to be, oh, it's going to be cranky too. All right. So what I will actually do is, because I can do it, well, yeah. If this doesn't work right away, this is the last time I do it, because I don't want to have this session consist of seeing you struggle. There's watching you watch me struggle with the Azure GUI. And I could do this in PowerShell, but I haven't set up the PowerShell scripts to do it yet. So let's see if we can bounce the resolution down on the real machine. So this is even down further than it was. They said the real machine was going to be small this way, but if you can't see the GUI, that ain't going to work real well. There, and so I got that. Now if I go over here, it'll make me log on and log off. Oh no, it was happy to just keep me up there. Okay, and then what I want to do is go up to Azure again. Cool, okay. Now I should be able to scroll down here. Come on, scroll button. That's not nice at all. So can I lose some menu bars and stuff? There's a menu bar.
Maybe zoom out, zoom in the browser.
Oh, maybe so it'll do that. Okay, there's zoom out and there's zoom in. And I could even turn zooming off if that's the issue.
You're pressing F11.
Sorry?
F11, press
F11? Okay. Okay, there's F11. Oh, there it is. Thank you. Okay, now you're going to have to tell me how to get out of this. You can tell that I don't usually run at low resolution.
Just press F11 again.
F11 again to get out of it? Okay, so I've chosen, thank you. I've chosen Enterprise Edition again, and it wants me to go to the next page there. So we're at the next page, so it asks me, what do you want to call the virtual machine? And I always call them after me. I'll have to change it after this conference though. And you can get a choice of sizes. And so they give you so many cores and so much memory. And by the way, there's a really nice thing that says, if you need more virtual machine, it just automatically gets it for you up to a certain size. And again, you can get up to 8 cores and 56 gigabyte of memory. So I'll just get the smallest one because I'm just going to illustrate things. You pay for these things by the minute. And then this is the user that's the administrator of the machine and the user password. And I'm not doing the Hadoop demo till tomorrow. I found out that the Hadoop scoop part of Hadoop, that's basically the equivalent of bulk copy in SQL Server, does not like passwords with exclamation points in them. This is a known limitation. It's like, really? Okay, so anyway, there's the configuration there. And it goes on to the next page. Thank you so much for the F11, by the way. And you're going to create a cloud service you need to manage it. And there's the cloud service DNS name, and that's fine. I want it to be on my Azure Cloud Essentials subscription. And I don't want this in East US. I want this in Western Europe. Western Europe, Northern Europe. And this has to be someplace where you have a storage account. Because what they're going to do is they're going to make a VM with the VHD on your storage account. So it's going to make a VHD on your storage account. So that's why I made a storage account there, because I really didn't like the name that they gave my storage account before. And you can have something be an availability set. And what an availability set is that they do maintenance on the host OS, right? You're responsible for the guest OS, the VM, but they do maintenance on the host OS. And if you have more than one VM of the same type, and you put it in the same availability set, they will make sure that one of them is always up at a time. So if you have 2 of them, 1 and 2, basically when they go to do maintenance, they'll knock down 1 first, and then they'll bring it up and knock down 2 afterwards. So you always have at least 1. I'm only going to have 1, so I don't care. Okay. And then it's going to say, what ports do you want to open? And that's fine too. Oh, good. That even works. And it goes out. Excellent. Okay, so these are the default ports, and I'll leave them that way. You're also going to be able to VPN into the machine. So there we go. And so now it's actually, what is it upset about? It's creating it right there. And this little thing goes back and forth. Remember, if you zoom it, you stop everything on the box. Okay, so now it's creating that virtual machine. It's going to create it. And about 10 minutes later, I'll have a virtual machine. So when I go back to that, I'll actually have it when I need it, which is what the point of that was in the first place. Okay, great. So now what do I have to do? Oh, there's a slide deck involved, isn't there? Sorry. It's like I do all this in the third person. All right. So there's 4 main ways to run SQL Server. The first way is the way people usually think of when they want to run SQL Server, which is what? I have a computer, I install SQL Server on the computer, and I run SQL Server on the bare hardware. And that's the most common way that people run SQL Server as far as I know. And I've always run it that way, except I've run it on a virtual machine. So I actually run it most of the time the second way, which is SQL Server virtualized on premises. I do not have SQL Server actually run on my own machine. SQL Server always runs on VMs. And the reason for this is I'm actually running weird and sundry versions of SQL Server, and so I can just choose the VM and bring it up. Also, if I do something to trash the OS setup, then I just recover what I can and delete the virtual machine and it's gone. So SQL Server on hardware, SQL Server in a VM on premises, and then SQL Server in a VM on the cloud, which is what you just saw me make up. And this is called IaaS, or Infrastructure as a Service. And then Windows Azure SQL Database, which is Platform as a Service. And so there's 4 main differences between which of these you choose. One of them is resource capacity and latency. So latency is pretty obvious, right? If things are up on the cloud and your applications are on premises, then everything has to go from the cloud to on premises. And you have to keep that latency, in mind. Now, if your actual applications are in the cloud and your database is in the cloud, that's perfect, because they actually have really nice high-speed networks up there. And so they will actually route your messages or your packets to using their high-speed networks as though they were local, as long as you put them in the same data center. So that's why they want you to have everything in the same data center. So latency from client to server is only an issue, or server to client is only an issue if you actually have your clients afar. Notice that I'm going to back up a database to Windows Azure later on, and I'm going to back it up to my Windows Azure account on the West Coast. So that's fine too. I will have to consider latency in there, but what's nice about that is I have the equivalent of a cheap disaster recovery site. If we had an earthquake on the West Coast and the thing crashed and burned, I have a copy of something out here. And you can actually make that happen automatically, or you can, do your own maintenance so that happens. The big difference between them, though, is hardware. So in every system I've ever seen, you can always buy new hardware. You can buy more hardware, you can buy faster disks, you can buy more disks, you can spread things out across disks. And on a VM in Azure, and certainly in Windows Azure SQL Database, you can't do that. So I'm going to give you the details later on. But what's not good about this is you can't solve problems with hardware. You are not in charge of the hardware. And then finally, throttling. So throttling happens, and I'll do this in detail as well. Throttling happens in Windows Azure SQL Database on a per person basis, a per account basis, and also on a per machine basis. So when you're using Windows Azure SQL Database, you're actually sharing a real database with about 50 other people. And so it's possible that between all 50 of you, you have the ability to sort of be throttled at a point in time. And so besides that, they also have throttling limits just for you. I actually believe they use Resource Governor to do this, but nobody's ever told me that they do, to be sure. So you can be throttled. On a SQL Azure Service, random words, right? SQL Azure on a cloud VM, you can actually be throttled if you use too much of your storage network bandwidth. So you can actually be throttled between the VM and the storage account if you use too much of that. But there's ways around that as well. So differences between running it on premises and in the cloud. So I thought about what to call this slide, and it sounds really strangely worded, but the reason why people are going to this cloud is there's a lot of stuff you don't have to do. And so if I put stuff in the cloud and pay by the minute, what don't you have to do? And if you run SQL Server on an Azure VM, the big thing you don't have to do, in fact, you're not allowed to do it, is you don't get to choose hardware. There's a series of discrete sizes of VM, you saw them, right, with a discrete number of CPUs and a discrete amount of storage hardware, and you are not allowed to choose except from their list of supported hardware. Now, they actually may expand the supported hardware in the future, but basically you just choose disks. And that's all you can choose is disk by disk. And there's a big discussion right now going on the MVP list, is that you can only choose disks, and all of the disks have the same throughput. And if you know about IOPS, it's 500 IOPS, which is actually pretty low throughput. So the way that you scale these is you actually get a bunch of disks and you scale them out, and you can get more IOPS that way. You can configure disks, and I'll show you how to configure disks for the VM, but that's not the same as choosing hardware. And a lot of times people spend a lot of money choosing hardware. You don't have to spend it, you don't have to have any meetings except to choose, I'd like an A4 instance over here and an A5 instance over here and so forth. So that's nice. You also don't have to maintain the host system of the VM. If you get a VM, you do have to maintain the guest, the thing where your server is running, but you don't have to maintain the host. And also, you don't have to worry about installing SQL Server. Those SQL servers that are up there right now are RTM versions. When I chose that SQL Server, I get SQL Server as part of my VM. I pay for that, and I don't have to install it. Now, I do have to maintain it eventually, but I don't have to install it for myself. So notice I never ran setup, I never cared where to put things, it just put things where it wanted to. So if you have a VM even, you don't have to do any of these things. However, if you have a Windows Azure SQL database, you don't have to do any of these things, plus you don't have to maintain SQL Server. They maintain SQL Server. You don't have to maintain the guest OS because you don't even see the guest OS. In fact, I'll show you right after this slide what you get with the other one. So no maintaining SQL Server, no maintaining the guest OS. No choosing SQL Server version or edition. There is only one edition. It has the same features, Right now, there is a feature where you can get sort of something better that's called premium service, and I'll talk about that too. But pretty much that's the only choice you have. It's all the same version and it's all the same edition of SQL Server. I can't say I want an Azure database on SQL Server 2012. It's not possible. Buying SQL Server licenses. So the licenses are included. If you just fire up an Azure database, there are no license charges, or it's included in the price, right? Everything's included in the price. It's like buying what's it called? Price fix, dinner. And all the configuration choices are taken away from you. Everything's the same unless you want Premium Edition, and I'll tell you about Premium Edition. And many and most of the DBA configuration tasks you are not allowed to do. So, for example, setting trace flags, laying out file groups, backup and restore, you're not really allowed to do. And I'll do the backup and restore part because it always upsets all DBAs, right, at that point. So everything, okay, what you're paying for is the fact that you don't have to do a lot of stuff, and they take care of it for you. And you can spread the instances around, so if the Irish data center burns to the ground tomorrow, then you just move your stuff, or they'll move your stuff to California or someplace. Might be a little slower from there. They'll move it to the Netherlands. So there's three reasons to run on Windows Azure SQL Database. Oh, and I said I built one. So as opposed to the VM, if you want a Windows Azure SQL Database, you don't really have that much choice. Here we go. So basically I'm building a VM, and notice it is still running and provisioning the VM, so it's not done yet. So it's a good thing I started that way. And here's the SQL databases. It's very strange because I'm always used to thinking of SQL Server in terms of let's build an instance, and then an instance has more than one database. But in this case, the database is the center of the universe. So if I choose SQL databases, and I don't have any SQL databases, they don't count Azure at a VM as a SQL database. This is Windows Azure SQL Database, or actually Microsoft Azure SQL Database. It says you don't have any SQL databases, create one. Now it also has over here servers. And so let me tell you how the thing works between servers and databases. You actually get what looks like a server, an instance. And if you just say create a database, it'll make an instance for you. And when you delete that database, it'll say, this is the only database on that server. Would you also like to delete the server? And you'll see me say no every time. The reason why is when you create a new server, and I don't even know if you can create one by itself, if you create a new server, they assign it this wacky name, right? And you cannot change the wacky name at all. So basically, imagine that goes into your connection strings. And so then you want to delete the database to save money, but you might use it again sometime. Why would I want to change all my connection strings every time I delete the database and add it back in? So I leave servers out there. Servers don't cost any money, right, at all. Actually, I think they delete them after 90 days or something like that if you have nothing on them. But servers don't cost any money. If I want to see if they've made any changes, I can go up to the server and say select edit version and know if they've changed the version. So I always like to keep the servers out there. However, if you've noticed, both of my servers are in the West US. So let's actually create a new database on a server, which means I'm going to have to change all my connection strings for this particular part of the world. And so if I create a database, I want a name of that database, let's call it test, because I have no imagination. And it can either be Web Edition or Business Edition. And actually, Web Edition is up to 1 gigabyte, and Business Edition is up to 150 gigabytes. 150 gigabyte database is all you get? Yeah. So this is not for really big systems unless you want to shard it and scale it out, right? Take and do partitioning, the equivalent of partitioning. And so we've got one called test, and we're going to use the Web Edition. By the way, this is actually going to cost me 62 cents if I leave it out there for the day. And actually, they only charge by the day. So I'm spending 62 cents of MSDN's money to do this. And it's going to be a gigabyte large. You get to choose the collation right here. And the only thing that's kind of weird about choosing the collation is once you choose the collation, you can't change the collation. Another interesting thing is you can't choose any of the new UTF-16 collations that came with SQL Server 2012. If you knew there was UTF-16 collations in SQL Server 2012, right? Everybody does know that the varchar data type is actually not UTF-16 but UCS2. which is sort of okay until you get to the really high Unicode characters, which aren't really supported except as double byte characters. But anyway, you can't even do that in this thing. It's not a collation talk, so I'll stop now. And then again, I have 2 subscriptions, so I can choose which ones I want. This one says the free money is running out. They renew it each month in 4 days, so we'll use up this one now, Windows Azure Cloud Essentials. There we go. And then I can either choose a server, or I can have a server, make another server. And notice that at this point it's saying, I can choose this one in the West US, or I can make a new one. So let's make a new one. And do I get even to tell where it is? I should be able to get to tell where it is, no? Let's see. Oh, there we go. Okay, so the login name would be my name, because it always is. And the login password should be, and I get used to doing this for Hadoop, so I might as well do it now. Don't use there we go. And then the region for the database. So since our, let's see, VM is in Ireland, we'll actually put this one in Netherlands. So that would be West Europe, right there. Okay, so we'll put that there. Now, one of the things that, because now you have created a database on the internet, right? And so conceivably you could get denial of service attacks, you could get people trying to get into your system now this way. And so one of the things that you have to get into the system, and I've left it out specifically so that we have to create it, is something called a firewall rule. So by default, no IP addresses have access to this server. This last checkbox says, if I make a Windows Azure service, like an Azure website or an Azure VM, Azure website or an Azure service, like a web service, I will allow those to have access to this service from inside the same data center. And so I always check this one, what could go wrong, right? Okay, and so at that point, that's it, I'm done. And it's gonna make me a database. It would actually go faster if I made one on a server that already existed. And notice, by the way, it's already made the virtual machine already. So I can go back to the virtual machine, and there the virtual machine is already running. Now I'll stop this after a while and get back to the, and it's already created the database too. So I'll stop this after a while and get back to the talk. But now I have a database, and so these are the 2 choices I'm talking about here. And so for the virtual machine, I can actually choose to try and connect to the virtual machine right here. Right, so let's try and RDP into the machine. So basically what I do if I check that is it says, here comes an RDP file. Do you want the RDP file? Yes. So we'll open the RDP file, and it should open me after it complains about the, there we go. And notice the name of the virtual machine, oh goodness, they can't even see this. The name of the virtual machine right there is my name at .cloudapp.net. They're all named cloudapp.net, right? Okay, so it's actually a Rumpelstiltskin system. If you know the name, you can attempt to connect to it. By the way, try Rumpelstiltskin. I don't know if you can connect to that one. Right? Everybody knows the Rumpelstiltskin fairy tale, right? It's a cultural reference. And so at that point, basically, it now is going to connect through RDP, and it wants the password that I gave it. Now, one of them I gave one password, and the other one I gave another password, but hopefully I have 2 choices. And I'll let it remember my credential. And no, I've never tried to log onto it with a smart card. There we go. And so it's logged in and it says, my certificate isn't right, and it's like, fine. There we go. So now I'm connected to my VM. And it connects to the VM. It's just the same as though I'm giving the talk on RDP. In fact, conceivably, if it had Excel or if it had PowerPoint on it, I could move the talk over there and do it all from here. And it's just setting up just the same way as if you logged on to Windows immediately. Is everybody okay with that? All right, we can let it set up, but let's go back to our other one for a second. So, okay, we went back to RDP. And now let's actually try and connect to the Windows Azure SQL database. Now the database is sort of hanging out there. And so the database is going to be a little more difficult to connect to. And so what I want to do, where's the database? There it is, SQL database. And by the way, tomorrow if you come to the last talk of the day that I get to do then, we'll make a couple of Hadoop clusters. And we'll connect to Hadoop that way too. And you can connect to Hadoop and play with the SQL database as well. So that's the only things I know how to do, that and storage accounts. Actually, I've never made up a website, believe it or not, right? Okay, so where am I? Where is my database? SQL databases. And here's my database right here named test. And if we click on that, one of the things that I might be able to do here is configure the database. So let's configure the database here. and it says, oh, this is something different. I don't want that. I want to manage the instance. So where's manage, Bob? Oh, there it is. The other thing they did a lot at the beginning, which is fairly awful, is that they would change this portal all the time. So if you were actually using the portal all the time, which a lot of people do, right, you would be confused all the time. Or if you were trying to teach off this portal, it was always way fun. They also have PowerShell, and we'll see how you can manage some of these with PowerShell. So what it says is that I don't have this IP address. It's not included in the IP addresses that are allowed to connect through the firewall. Do you want to update the firewall rules to let us connect? And yes, I do. And the only reason I can get away with this is I am the administrator of my own account. If you tried to do this, you wouldn't get this message, of course. So yes, I want this to connect. And once it connects, then I have a connection to a database. Now I can go ahead and manage it with this GUI here. Was added to the firewall rules. Do you want to manage it now? Well, yes. That's why I did that. So it comes up with the management portal, which unfortunately at this point is Silverlight. So don't try and manage it on anything that doesn't have Silverlight on it. There we go. And I can type in my user ID here. But at that point, what I really want is I really want to use it with SQL Server Management Studio. So let's just get out of this. And the hardest part is to remember this stupid name. I'm sorry, this interesting name. There we go. Remember, we were supposed to know political correctness in the US. And I'm fairly good at it, really I am. Okay, so there we go, and there's my name of my server. So we'll copy and paste that in. Okay, so if I go to Management Studio right now, I have a connection to my local SQL server, and I can connect to, and it just considers the thing to be a database engine. So I can connect to the database engine right there. Now, this only supports right now SQL authentication. So I'm going to do SQL authentication with my ID, and I always forget what the rest of this should be, and it's not going to tell me. I believe it's .database.windows.net. Let's find out. And if not, it'll just hang. And I want SQL authentication, and I want the login right here. And there. And remember my password because I'm too lazy to remember it. And hopefully if I got this database.windows.net thing correct, it'll connect. There we go. And I'm connected. And I have a database in SQL Server Management Studio. And so I'm all set. I can go ahead and make a table. And I'm happy with this because that's what I like to do. So create table, food, with an ID that's an integer. And in this world, I actually need a clustering key. And I can get one by making that the primary key. And then a name that's a varchar 10. Whoops, like type Bob, 10. Okay, and that works just fine. I don't want to be a master. Now the odd thing about this is that you can go from master to one other database, but once you're in the other database, you can't go back to master without logging back on again. And I'll tell you why in a few minutes. So now I'm in my real database and I can make a table, and there's the table. And I can put some rows in it, and there's only so much fun you can have right now. Right, there you go. Okay, great. So let's go back to the slides and have less fun or more fun. Oh, and by the way, what happened to my virtual machine over here? So supposedly, I'm connected to my virtual machine through RDP, and sure enough, there it is. And no, that's the HD Insight old one. Where's the new one? Huh, where did it go? I wonder if I'm connected from inside this. Oh, there it is. Yeah, right, inside this one. So I got a VM within a VM, and it actually brought up Server Manager, of course, which it always does. And the first thing I always do is say, manage Server Manager properties. Don't start Server Manager upon login, right? That always irritates me. And then we'll turn Server Manager off, right? And then it'll tell you information about your virtual machine. And remember, I said I wanted SQL Server here. And so basically, if I go back to my desktop, this is probably Windows 2012 Release 2, which is the equivalent of Windows 8.1. I should be able to go in here and take some of these things. Goodness, what do I want? The database engine, and oh, that wasn't right. Try that again. I want SSMS. So SSMS should be right here, and I also want the other one, right? And I want to pin that to the start menu. Notice it's not the, no, I don't pin it to the start menu, I want to pin it to the taskbar. You learn the name of all the GUI accessories when you get to Windows 8.1. And I also want to take the configuration manager, there it is right there, and I want to pin that to the taskbar. Great. It's a great way to learn Windows 8.1. Okay, fine. There. So now basically what it's doing is it's saying, did you want to connect with that SSMS? And of course I did. And it knows who I am. And there I'm connected right there. So what did that take? What time is it? 3:35. It's not 3:35, is it? Really? Oh, because it never is where I am. They're UTC time, right? And so I'm never UTC time, but I am now, right? Actually, is it 3:35? No, it's not. It's 4:35? Okay. I better go quickly then. I only have, what, 55 more minutes. Okay. So was everybody impressed by how little that took to create? And by the way, I'm paying for that by the minute if it's the VM, and I'm paying for it by the day. So as long as I delete this, and I can remember to delete it when I get home, I'm paying 63 cents plus. I actually made one of these for the first talk. I didn't use it, and I kept it on all day, and I think it was $1.67. So it's like nothing, right? Well, not nothing. It adds up pretty quick. But you knock them down and delete them when you're not using them. Okay. There's one more thing I want to tell you before I go back to slides, which is, where's that VM? So basically where the VM is on my storage account. Storage accounts are like file systems, but they're really not file systems. There are 3 types of storage you can have, and the only one I'm interested in right now is the blob storage. And blob storage are blobs that live in containers. A container is like a directory of a file system, but you only get one level of containers. You can fake additional levels of containers, which is what Hadoop does, or you can just take your one level of containers and put stuff in it. And notice right now I have one level of containers called VHDs, and that's where the VHD for in my Europe account. I have more in my other accounts, and that's where the VHD for the VM is. In fact, I have a VHD and I have a disk. So basically it's got a disk for me and a VHD. Great. And that's in my storage account, so I'm paying for it right now. Okay, and that's probably enough for right now. So now you see how all the stuff is laid out and how pretty much easy it is to do. And I'm not saying that because I've done it for a long time. I'm saying that because it was really easy. I did not struggle to learn a VM. I did not struggle to learn HD Insight because it was on Azure. Not that I wouldn't have struggled otherwise. So there's 3 main ways to run on, or reasons to run on Windows Azure SQL database. It's easier, and it's also elastic. You can set things up to actually run this with in conjunction with a website. And if the website gets busy, then they'll increase the size of your Azure database. You figure they do that. But the other half to it is, if the website gets unbusy, they'll decrease the size of your Windows Azure database. So basically the thing expands and contracts, and you only pay for what you need at the time, which is nice. And also, of course, price. 63 cents for a database, and I don't have to install it. That's not bad. And I get it, by the way, for the whole day. And I have a whole gigabyte, and I can do whatever I want with it. What's 62 times 30? I don't know. By the way, there is also a calculator. I'm not going to play calculator with you because that's not the point. But anyway. And the premise is that you don't directly compare SQL Server on hardware and Windows Azure SQL Database. Because when you do compare that, Windows Azure SQL Database loses big time. And I'll tell you why it does that when you see how it's laid out in real storage. So what you do instead is decide what levels of performance you need, and then decide if it fits your needs. So don't say, oh my God, the VM can only get 500 IOPS. Instead say, how many IOPS do I really need, and am I really measuring IOPS or transactions per second? And then decide what you need to do to get where you want. So, and use minimal repeatable examples for issues. So if you have an issue with the database, see if you can break it down to its lowest point, right? You guys are all really good at this. I mean, when somebody brings me, and they do all the time, right, I teach SQL, somebody brings me a big wild SQL query that has about 10 tables in it or more, and they say, what's wrong with the response time for this query? I say, well, let's join these 2 now here, and look at the query plan for this, and then we'll add this one in here, and you try and have the minimal repeatable example, right? Take out all the junk if you're trying to figure out what a problem is. In addition, you want to log your results, because you'll notice that we don't have a traditional SQL log in this system. but you can log your results and read the log, and that's the way to actually keep track of things in this database. They call it, the cool word for it is telemetry. And so you add your own telemetry with this. There is specifically a connection-specific context info GUID. So upon entry to the database, in your own code, you could write information that catches that GUID and then traces you through the system. And most people do this in their own code, like in their own web code or in their own web service code. So you can see who's entering the system. And don't measure the average, measure percentile. Because the big problem with Windows Azure SQL Database has always been, and I gotta stop doing things in terms of problems, the big behavior of SQL Server Azure Database has always been that there sometimes can be these big gaps in performance. Right, you can actually go and you can go to Management Studio and go click, 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 and then on the 5th click, it'll take a long time to come back. And so what you want to do is not measure the average, measure the percentile. And by the way, you can see this in websites. When I go to some of the websites, I don't even have to know that they're running a system like this, right? You click through the website, and then one too many clicks, and it just sort of seems to stop for a few seconds. And before that, it was almost immediate. And then it picks up again, and you go click, click, back through the website again. So do realize there'll be some blips in the system where other people are doing a lot of work. So measure like the 50th or 95th or 99th percentile rather than the average, because there will be some big ones that'll bring the average up or down, depending on what you're measuring. So the setup, we already did this. Create a Windows Azure SQL database through the portal, or there's a PowerShell set of scripts, or there's an admin API. The nice thing about the PowerShell set of scripts is that if you only want to do some discrete batch process on the database, you can create a database, run your PowerShell scripts to do whatever you want, and then shut the database down, right? That's fine. In fact, back it up and then shut it down. And create multiple servers per subscription. I can have as many servers as I want. Right now, for that particular subscription, I have one on the West Coast and one in Ireland. I'm sorry, in the Netherlands. And the server can be one you already have out there or new. Again, I like to keep the servers out there because I don't want to remember new names each time. And if the server already exists, you can actually use DDL. So now that I have a server that was already existing, if I want to spend another 62 cents, I'm right here, I'm connected to test. Notice you can't get back to master anymore from here. So we actually have to go and log on to master. And the way you do that, you learn this really quickly, is connect to database default, which is master, or you can choose master. And then say okay, and you'll see master show up here. So if you already have an instance, or the equivalent of what looks like a master database, you can also create a database like this. Create database test2, and now I have 2 of them. And of course, they will show up on the portal. And there it is. So basically now I have 2, you can see them on the portal, and they will actually show on this drop-down list box, and I can go to that one. But that just cost me another 62 cents. I think I can probably afford it. Okay, so there you go. And then what you must do is provision logins. Logins go in the master database, and then users in the user database, and data, and I'll show you how to do that coming up, like how do you get tables and databases and stuff up there. And for a new user, Windows Azure SQL Database owners need to add a login for that user and a firewall entry for the user's IP address, unless you're always using the same set of IP addresses. And by the way, if you make up a firewall entry for an IP address, you can make them up for a range of IP addresses if you want to. And if you want to leave the whole thing wide open, there's a guy, doesn't live in London, but he's from the UK, named Jamie Thompson. And you can actually use Jamie Thompson's Windows Azure SQL Database of AdventureWorks, because he basically puts it up there for anybody to use. And he publishes I don't know if the administrator, but a user ID, and I believe you can define your own tables and stuff on his. He did this as a community project. So you can use his if you want to. For his, he just used the thing wide open, right? He made a firewall rule that said from 0 to 255, whatever, anybody can get in. And you can do that too if you want to. So you do have to do this for every user if they have different IP addresses. Okay, so let's talk about what you get in terms of SLA. So for SLAs, the availability SLA for this is 99.9, 3 nines. And that means you're unavailable for 42 minutes each month. You have to consider that. And by the way, the rule is, if you're available for less than that because they made a mistake, they give you your money back, which really isn't what you want, but it's better than nothing, right? You just don't want them to be down for more than 42 minutes each month. And by the way, they don't always use the entire 42 minutes. They're doing maintenance on different things, and they may have to bring your database down. There is no performance guarantee yet. However, you can buy resources. You can buy a resource guarantee with something that's in beta now called Premium Database. With Premium Database, you can reserve a CPU or 2 CPUs, and you can reserve a certain number of IOPS on SQL Server. So this is the only way you can actually control your own performance right here. There's no security SLA yet. You might have heard that they passed some kind of security clearance on Azure in general, but not on Windows Azure SQL Database. So not yet. You'd have to have a VM for that. Okay, so here's how it works. Here's how it's set up. And if you've read about this, you've probably seen this diagram. It's a fairly famous diagram. Your application is outside the cloud, and you go in through the cloud, and the first thing you hit is a load balancer. So when I log in from out here, I'm hitting a load balancer. And what the load balancer does is it uses sticky sessions to route it to one of these gateway servers. And notice at this point, it's all using TDS, right? There is no HTTP access or anything else. They're using TDS, which means that you must configure your machine that's connecting to it to pass port 1433 outside the firewall, because they use TDS at port 1433, and that's all you get. Right? Okay, so it goes in through this gateway, and which gateway machine it hits is irrelevant to you. And then the gateway actually does authentication, authorization, and checks the firewall rule. And then when you're done, it routes you to SQL Server that's actually running your Windows Azure SQL database. And what do you mean it routes you to one? Doesn't it have to route you to the right one? No, there are actually 3. It does have to route you to the right one, but there are 3. So the way that this works is as follows. This actually is a real version of real SQL Server, but it is, a transition of the code base, little different things in the code base. So basically the way that it works is each user database is replicated 3 times. So you have 3 replicas per database. So right now I have databases test and test2, but really I have 6 databases. They're replicated over 3 places. They're not geo-replicated yet. In other words, they're all in the same data center, but I have 3 replicas. And I have 1 primary replica and 2 secondary replicas. And all the traffic goes through the primary replica. They don't load balance between the 3 replicas. You do get the 3 replicas. And replica promotion happens during failover. So when they fail over, and remember these are commodity machines, so they can fail over. When they do fail over, they switch to another replica. And so that's one of the places where you can get these little blips in performance while they switch to another replica. Now, every commit that you do in the database is a quorum commit. They're actually going to commit on 2 out of the 3 replicas, the primary and 1 of the secondaries. The third one is actually replicated to asynchronously. So, but everyone has to commit on 2 servers, which is going to slow it down as well, right? Primary replicas are not always on the same server. So I have a master database, a database called test, and another database called test2. It's absolutely possible that my pseudo master database could be on real server in their data center, real server A. So my master could be over here, my test could be over here, and my test2 could be over there. So basically, there is no way to do a use command in this world. They have fixed SQL Server Management Studio, so it looks like you can do a use from master to something else. But if you put in a use command in Management Studio, right, notice I could get from master to something else, but not something else to master. So now I'm in test 2, I can't get out of test 2. If I try and do a use command back to test, like that, it says the use command isn't supported in this world. Right, you can't switch between databases that way, which means you can't have 3-part names. No 3-part names, no 4-part names, no linked servers in SQL Azure, right? 2-part names and that's it. In fact, you don't even technically have a real database. What they do in the internals of the machine is they have sort of put in a level of indirection. So each real server has, I believe, it's 5 real databases, named amazingly enough 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Your master database is actually a part of one of those databases, so a piece. believe the word they use for it is silo, right, of that piece of that database. And you share each real database with 50 other people. And so basically what you get is something that looks like a database, and actually something that looks like a master database, but it isn't, which each of those is shared with 50 other people. And you get free 3 replicas. So with the premium edition, what you actually get is a database that you have that corresponds to a real database that you have by yourself. Right, so that's what you get with the premium edition. You're not sharing with anybody. Okay, great. Everybody okay with this so far? People are leaving, you know. That was terrible that you could do those are the people that really like the use command, right? Okay. They have just left. Well, what did I say other than you can't use the use command and you're sharing a database with 50 other people. Apparently those people don't like to share either, right? Okay. So I got to step this up too, because we won't get to the beam if we don't. So Azure SQL Database can be administered with the portal, with Transact SQL, with SSMS, and with the Windows Azure PowerShell commandlets. Technically, Windows Azure PowerShell commandlets don't support SMO. SMO is what normal PowerShell uses. However, they do support a subset of SMO, or it does work. They just don't technically support it. And not every option is available with every method. One of the things that you didn't see me do at all, because I can't in Windows Azure SQL Database, is to set database level options. I can't do that. However, there's one database level option somebody that was a big person wanted, like a big muckety-muck person. And so the one option you can set is, are you ready for this? Recursive triggers. Somebody needed recursive triggers, and so you can set recursive triggers. Notice that I couldn't set recursive triggers at create time though, and I couldn't set recursive triggers anywhere through the portal I've looked. You have to set those in SQL Server Management Studio or through the PowerShell commandlets. So not every option is available with every method of administration. Everybody okay with that? Now I can run you some PowerShell commandlets, but what I'd rather do at the time is just make sure we finish this. So what I want to do is go on from there, and if we do, I'll get to the PowerShell commandlets. I have PowerShell commandlet set up. It's fairly interesting because everything I can do on the portal, so if I'm managing this database, oh, I'm back to databases now, there we go. And if I refresh it, I should see the test2 database. Come on. It's always fun trying to do these too if the Azure is down. I've done this once when Azure started to act crazy in the middle of the afternoon. I used to teach a 1 or 2 day course in it. And so it's really fun to do this when Azure is down. There we go. It should know now that I have, there we go, 2 databases. And so everything that you can do in the portal, including monitoring and things like that, managing, you can actually do through the PowerShell commandlets. So notice one of the things I can monitor if we don't get back to this is deadlocks, failed connections, and successful connections. And I can also add some additional metrics. And the additional metrics would be throttled connections. I don't know why they didn't put throttled connections in by default, because it seems like this is the one that people really want to know about, but maybe they didn't want you to know that they existed if you were naive, right? I'm sorry, I'm just trying to tell you how the technology works, right? I'm not trying to sell it to you. I don't work for Microsoft. They just pay my way and buy my food and clothes. Okay. And you can tell how many were blocked by the firewall as well. This is because you do not have a SQL log, right? Why? Well, you have to share the SQL log with 50 other people times 5 databases, and you can't get to things that other people can see, so why would, you don't want a database that other people can see what you're doing. This is supposed to be the facade of you have your own database. And you really do have your own database. Nobody can see what you're doing. In fact, it's really fun to see the DMBs come out with empty fields, where you know that there should be something there, but you can't see it. Okay, let's go on. So, DBAs hate this. And the reason why is technically, if you can do backup and restore, you don't really need a DBA. Oh no. So DBAs cannot control many of the things that DBAs control, like instance level options, trace flags, where the master database is, MSDB, well there is no MSDB. They can't control those. Database level options, the only one is set recursive triggers on, and you must do it with SQL. I think you can do it with PowerShell too. No disk placement, no file groups, no replication. I thought you said it was doing replication. Yeah, they're doing it, but you can't do it, right? No log shipping, no resource governor, because they're using the resource governor on you. You just don't know it. No trace flags. However, and this is really interesting, about a week ago, 2 weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, they decided to support compression, row compression and page compression. And so I actually compressed some tables in Windows Azure SQL Database, and then I went back to look at the metadata to see how they were compressed. In other words, just I wanted to see the fact that the compression DDL that I issued just worked. Now, anybody know the metadata table you use for compression? That's syspartition stats. However, when I said select star from syspartition stats, it says, this table is not supported in this release of SQL Server. It's like, so I can compress things, but they haven't made it yet possible for me to see what's compressed. Really? Well, they do things in dribs and drabs and they catch up, right? Also, no profiler, so you can't run profiler. And X-event trace, you can't run X-event trace. You're not supposed to tell people what happens in the future for SQL Azure, but they had a big discussion last year, a big, presentation where they said that X events were going to be supported, and they showed you how you were going to do it. And I went home and I looked in the metadata and I found them, and then it never happened. Right? And when I went to find out why, it said, well, that's been postponed for later. So no X events, no profiler, and you get a subset of the DMVs, not all the DMVs. So all the DBAs that do all these things, well, we don't need them anymore. Send them home. However, you do need to do backup and restore. However, if I go to, remember in SQL Server in general, you cannot restore a higher level backup to a lower level database. Right? If I take a backup on SQL 14, I cannot restore that backup to SQL 12. Right? That's always been the way it's been in SQL Server. People have hit this all the time. Right? You can't restore lower than you back up. The problem with Windows Azure SQL Database is we have no idea what version it is. Right? Really, we don't. Right? So if I go in here, I'm actually going to write a blog entry on this when I'm through talking about it. So if I go in here and I say select add version, there, add version shows up to be 11 something. It's 11.0.9208.146, and I do this every once in a while so I can see if they've made any changes. But they don't guarantee that if this changes, they haven't made changes. And if, if this stays the same, they haven't made changes. And they don't guarantee they change it every time they do. Oh, so what version is this? We're not sure. Let's see if they have partition stats today, right? Or partition information. So this is select star from sys, and it's, what's it called? Partition? Oh, it's not going to give me IntelliSense either. Okay, partitions. Partitions would be nice if you spelled it the right way. Okay, ooh, it's got IntelliSense, I take it back. Is it there now? No, it's not there now. So I can compress things, but I can't tell if they're compressed. However, let's see if I can create a sequence. Right, this is version 11, that's 2012. In 2012, they added a sequence object, create sequence, my sequence. That's fine. And sequence is not supported. Oh, well, what do they support then? It turns out that it's a fairly weird version, sort of halfway between version 10 and version 11. In fact, what I like to say, although I'm sure it's a production-ready copy of this, is it's somewhere between CTP1 and CTP3 of SQL Server 2012. There are no sequences, which were added in CTP3. There are no windowing functions, which were added in CTP3. However, there are the new set of SQL functions, right, like try parse, which were added in CTP3 also. So now I'm confused. Don't even try and figure out what version this is, right? And by the way, this I found just recently, I'll have to share it with you. If I say select star from sys tables, remember this says we're 2012, right? There's sys tables, I don't have any tables, but look at over here in the metadata. Is memory optimized? That's the hackathon tables from SQL 14. So what version is it? No idea at all. So basically they do not support backup and restore, right? Because they don't really know what version this is. And they're not going to guarantee that it doesn't change either. And you don't want to take a backup that you can't restore. So what they do, instead of supporting backup and restore, and you may have heard of this before. So one more time, there is no backup. You cannot do a backup with backup. There is no restore. You cannot restore anything. In fact, you cannot back up the database and then restore it back to the same place. However, they introduced another format for this. Anybody know what the format is? Sorry, I'm just looking to see how much time I have. Anybody know what the format is? It says so on the slides. Right? They introduced something called the backpack. Right? Have you heard of the backpack? You take your data and you put it in your backpack. Okay, so one way to do a backpack is with code, and you can do it with code. Another way is to actually do it off the portal. And so, okay, we're going to capture all these additional metrics. By the way, you don't pay extra for additional metrics, but you do wait for a while. There we go. Okay, and so one of the things that you can do from here is you can do, notice what it says is an export. Okay, so I'll do an export from here. So when I do an export, what they will do is actually make a backpack. There's a backpack right here. You take your data, I'm sorry, I really do have to make fun of this, right? You take your data and you put it in your backpack and you take it with you, seriously, right? And a backpack also includes a DAC pack. And what a DAC pack is a series of XML that represents your schema. If you have an empty schema only, then it's a DAC pack. If you have data, it's a backpack. And really it turns out what a DAC pack is a zip file with a bunch of XML files that comprise your schema. What a backpack is a DAC pack with another level of zip, which includes bulk copy of all the tables. That's really what this is. You're doing bulk copy of each individual table. Well, mine ought to be pretty quick because I don't have any individual tables. And where do you back this up to? Well, if I'm doing it from here, I can back it up to my storage account. So let's take it here and actually back it up from this subscription. That's fine. There's the blob storage account in the West US. So if I really wanted to save my data really good, I could back it up to the West US and then choose a container there. Well, I just happen to have one called Backpacks, amazingly enough. So we'll put that in the Backpacks container so I know where it is. So I don't lose my data, it's in my backpack. Sorry. The backpack people don't like me anymore anyway. I make fun of their stuff way too often. Actually, I did a demo with backpacks at one point, and they have a shell extension, and I right-clicked on the shell extension, and it came up in Spanish. And I didn't know what to do, so I just said, that's the Spanish backpack, and they were not amused. Right? Okay, anyway, so we'll export the database there. And what you're actually doing is submitting a job to export the database. Fine. And you'll eventually get a backpack. By the way, to actually see the containers in your storage account, there's a few different ways you can do it. One is to go through the portal. So there's the containers you can see in the portal. Another one is to get a public domain program like this that actually allows you to select a storage account and it sort of shows it right here. So there's my backpacks here, and there's the one that I just put out there right now. So there's the thing that's in my backpack. Great. Or what did I do to the other one? Sorry. There. Oh, right, it's right here. Sorry. There it is. 4.2 at 4:02. You were looking at the date, weren't you? I wasn't, but I could see that didn't look right because I knew there was those two other files there. And then what do you do to restore it? Well, restore is import. Now you can look as long as you want for import in the portal, and it's really nice and well hidden. Here's the way you would import it into the portal. So there is no import. If I go back to a database right here, it says I can make a new database, or I can make a new server here, right? But you click this new, and one of the new choices you get is import. Cool, so that's how you get it in, is import. Let's make a third database. Do I feel rich today? Sure, why not? So it wants a backpack, and I believe that one was out there. And so where's my container to view data? Where's it at? There it is. Under backpacks, I have this one right here. So we'll take the one that let's put the pubs database out there. At least it's got some data in it. Okay, so we'll select pubs. And then we'll open the backpack. They'll check to see if it's okay. And then I will use it with my Azure Cloud Essentials subscription. And then we can restore it to Western Europe or the US. Let's do it here. There we go. And we have to know what the server name is and the password. And so that's backup and restore, really. What's this advanced database setting thing? Well, let's see if it matters. Oh, no, don't do this to me again. Okay. Oh, F11? Thank you. Okay, there. Don't do this with low resolution. Oh, advanced settings is to figure out how big it should be. Okay, there. So now I'm going to have 3 databases. Oh, $1.82. Okay, and that's in US dollars, right, of course. There we go. So eventually I'll have 3 at this point. So that's how you do backup and restore. Now that seems like a real pain in the half, and in fact it is. So one of the things they've set up for you to be able to do is, and I'll do this with the other database. No, I don't want to autocomplete form entries. I'll do this with the other database, is you can configure automated export. And this is new. When you configure automated export, it will do a backup to the storage account you want every so often. And it'll keep it for every so often so much. And you can specify the server name and the password, it'll do that. It'll also create a new database copy if you want to. So this is the closest they have to something that looks like SQL Agent. There is no SQL Agent in this world. There's a Windows Azure scheduler that you can use to schedule jobs, but it's not SQL Agent. And by the way, what happens if you drop a table by mistake? Well, too bad for you, right? Before you actually let somebody do the drop command, you better do a backup at the time, because there is no point-in-time recovery in this world. They had talked about, but nobody ever came up with, the idea of allowing you to use their backups, because they're constantly doing backups of this stuff, to recover for yourself. And what they were going to do is sell you so many backups, so many restores, point-in-time restores per month or something, but they never did that. Okay, everybody okay with this so far? Okay. Anything else we got that's interesting? Oh, F11. Not so far.
Can I ask a question?
Please do.
What about CLR and assemblies? Can you register and have the CLR functions in sort of situation?
No CLR.
No CLR.
No CLR. No CLR. I've got a whole list. Basically, it sounds too negative, so, but I have a whole list of no this, no that. It's coming up. So, and by the way, the backpack isn't point-in-time consistent, transactionally consistent. So the way you do a transactionally consistent one is say, create database as copy of some other database, and then you back that up. Create database as copy of some other database makes a transactionally consistent database. And by the way, there are commercial products. Does Red Bee have a commercial product that does this? Yeah, they do. And, but I believe it just uses backpacks. I may be mistaken. Oh, and by the way, backpacks actually live in Management Studio as well. So if I wanted to restore that backpack to a real SQL Server, I could just basically say under the real SQL Server databases, import data tier application, and that would actually ask me for a backpack. The first time I was doing a contract with somebody and asked for a copy of the database for my very own, the guy sent me a backpack, and it's like, what am I supposed to do with this? But it actually does restore. It's a little bit slower than a real restore, but it does restore just fine. Okay. So programming features. All outside, so this is the big list of no, right? All outside the database functionality is restricted. No file stream, no distributed transactions, no link servers, no three-part names. No heap tables, right? You can't have a table that's a heap. It must have a clustering key. How come? They're going to replicate it, right? Strangely enough, you can have a heap table without a clustering key in tempdb. And by the way, the only part of tempdb that you can use is the hash mark tempdb. You can't say create table tempdb.dbo.mytable, because that's not a temporary table, that's a permanent table in tempdb. You also cannot look at the metadata for tempdb, right? No select into. How come? Select into creates a heap, and you can't have a heap. Actually, it's strange, don't do this yourself at home. You can make a heap with a create statement, but you can't insert into it. The first row you try to insert, it says, I can't insert the row there, too bad, right? No CLR, no full text search, no service broker, no global temporary tables. Most or almost all of the session set options are unavailable, so you can't set options. And not all the options are available on all the SQL Server statements. In addition to this was the most shocking when I saw it, RCSI is now the default transaction isolation level. What's RCSI? It's read committed with snapshot isolation. So they're doing the equivalent of read committed in Oracle by default, which is intriguing, at least to me. So this has its own update strategy. Update happens over time and you have no control. Everything is always one version, and you cannot have a later version, an earlier version. You don't control the version. Now, changes supposedly were always backward compatible, and so you didn't have to worry about compatibility, except for the first time they did it. So the first time they did it, they actually updated spatial, and they actually made the spatial on-the-fly objects more accurate. I can illustrate this if you come to the spatial talk tomorrow morning. And basically then they had to invent this. SysTMDB objects impacted on version chains. changed. The only one they have in there is for spatial, and that was for the original one years ago. As of time of this presentation, it's February 2014. Well, it's not anymore. I blinked and missed it. It's actually March 2014. You saw it, right? Every once in a while, I'll just go up and do add version just to see what version it is. And supposedly, they're supposed to put announcements on the blog, but I haven't seen one in over a year. So there. It doesn't correspond to any SQL Server box version, and so I tried to figure out what this is. So programming with retry, basically you can get throttled. And you can get server unavailable because they might think you're running a DOS attack on it, right, denial of service attack. Or there could be network problems, or it can be in the middle of failing over. If it's in the middle of failing over, you can disconnect for a while. Also, there's global resource limits on CPU, I/O, number of busy workers, and so forth. And there's something called session throttling. Session throttling means your session is doing too much, and they have decided that your session should be throttled. And throttled means disconnect the session. And the session throttling error, the canonical error, is 40501. And you can decode the 40501 error to see why you were throttled. That's the most fun part. Also, there's the noisy neighbor problem. So if you're sharing the instance with 49 other people, imagine that it's the middle of the night, it's quiet, right? And then somebody decides to run a system stress test on exactly where you happen to be, right? That's the noisy neighbor problem. That's the equivalent of somebody coming in the middle of the night and making a bunch of noise because they're drunk, and you're trying to get some sleep, right? And you can do this, right, pretty easy. You can run a stress test against Azure, and there's nobody that'll stop you. They might throttle you eventually, but they can certainly use up a lot of the resources, right? You're sharing at this point. So there have actually been cases where people have called up, just like you call up a hotel, and said, my response time just went to nothing. Could you see what's happening? And there's actually some people on call or on site, and they'll actually look for you. And if you yell at them hard enough, I've seen it actually work, and they'll change where your server is. They'll fail you over manually. You are not allowed to fail yourself manually. So this is the noisy neighbor problem. And so the way that they ameliorate this problem is with something called Windows Azure SQL Database Premium Services. Okay, so I've done over an hour on Windows Azure SQL Database. Oh, and by the way, you can't make but so big of a database, so you have to do sharding. And we got to get to VM. Good. So we got less than a half hour to do VM. But VM is really easy, right? It's SQL Server. If the database administrators and the first people to come to the Windows Azure SQL Database class were the database administrators. And they all came and went, when I said they couldn't do any database administrator things, and then shook their head and said to the database administrator next to them, I told you it worked like this, we shouldn't even bother to come, right? And all left, right? So they like this, right? SQL Server and Azure VM. How come? There's something for them to do, right? So you can import an image from the store, or you can actually make your own VM and upload it, right? You're just uploading the VM to a VHD in your Azure storage account. Now, do realize that it sometimes does take a long time to upload things. I'm not sure I'd love to load a VM every day, but you could do it. And then you choose your own VM size based on the cores, the memory, the disk size is the number of disks, and each disk is 1 terabyte. And actually the disks live as blobs, you saw that, in Windows Azure Blob Storage. And then the number of IOPS. And every disk gets 500 IOPS per disk. So you figure if you want a decent amount of IOPS, you have to spread these things around. Okay, so here's the VM sizes. Extra small, oh, it even went off the side. Extra small, small, medium, well, you can read these as well as I can. And this is what you get. So the availability for this is still 3 nines. If you use availability sets and redundancy, you can increase it to 3 9.5. And so I've already told you what availability sets are. It assists in keeping the machine available during network failures or planned downtime or disk failures or whatever. And not only that, but if you have 2014, SQL Server 2014 always-on availability groups are supported in Azure. In fact, 2014 has a really weird feature where you can have one availability group for replica for an availability group set in Azure as well. So you can have 3 nodes on premises and 1 in Azure. Azure VMs come with an OS disk, 128 gig, A temporary disk, which is for page files, do not put tempdb on the it says do not put tempdb on the temporary disk, right? Because during a failover, they'll just fail the whole thing over and scratch it, and it will lose whatever you have in tempdb, and you don't want to do that. And then one-to-end data disks of 1 terabyte apiece. The disks are actually configurable, but there's a limit to what you can configure. You can configure read-only, read-write, or none as far as the cache goes. And so on an OS disk, none is not available and read-write is the default. On the data disk, and you can have as many of these as you want, none is the default. SQL Server always uses write-through. So the reason why you configure read-write is you have a small database. Read-only is a low number of concurrent reads, and none is a large database or a large number of concurrent reads. What you're configuring is the disk cache settings. I don't know how many people configure disk cache settings in their life, but you can configure them. Just imagine you have a SAN administrator and you have to fight with them over it. It's the same thing. So you get to choose yourself. Azure VM disks are actually Azure storage blobs. You saw the DHD container and you saw the things inside of it. And storage accounts can be throttled. So what you can do is kind of strange. All of your disks have to be on the same storage account. However, there is a Windows Azure SQL, I'm sorry, not a Windows Azure SQL database, that's too many buzzwords again. There is a SQL Server 2014 feature that allows you to create a database, a real database, on Windows Azure. So I want to show you this feature. So this is my on-premises, no it isn't, this is my on-premises Windows Azure SQL database, or sorry, my on-premises SQL Server 2014 database. You can tell because I'm doing Windows off. By the way, and that's the number one feature asked for right now, or at least number 2, is the fact that they want to be able to do Windows off. Because you have a Windows Azure Active Directory, why can't I use it? Okay, so I'm connecting to a real database right here, right now. And so what I can do, if I want to, is actually go into here, that's slides, and you can set up things to make in SQL 2014. Come on. You can make a database, not that one. You can make a database with an MDF and an LDF file on Azure itself. So what you do in this case is you don't do what's in the books online, that's wrong. I'll post you this demo because it blew away about 4 hours of my time to try and get this right myself. So what you must do is you must go up to the Azure storage and you can create yourself on the Azure storage a credential. So this is my storage account in the West Coast database, and there's something here called security, there it is, that you can use to make yourself a credential. You select a container, so say SQL D for SQL data, and then you can choose the security and make yourself a shared access signature. So when you make a shared access signature, generate signature, basically what you end up getting, copy to clipboard and test the signature to make sure that it works. Ooh, it didn't work. Okay. When you do that, you get something that looks like this. I've already made one. By the way, this is the only tool that you can use, obviously. Okay, so I have a signature that looks like this. Now the Books Online says, notice the signature is a URL. The Books Online says to use all of it. It's not right. You want to use this part, right? The part after the question mark. If you don't, you're going to get in trouble. And you make a credential right here with that part of the, where's my credential? You create a credential with the URL that you want to actually create the database on and the secret that you've generated with one of those tools. And with identity shared access signature. And I believe you already have that credential up there. Okay, yeah, it already exists. So now what you can do is you can create a database on a real SQL Server machine right here called TestDB that actually lives on the cloud. And ready? Here we go. And actually I'm going to create the thing from here. It's going to be connected to my machine right here, nowhere on the cloud at all. And the database itself is actually going to live on the west coast of the US. So it might take some, oh, what's it upset about? It might take some problems. Create file, the password is not correct, create database failed, really? All right, let's try the credential again. We'll drop this credential and we'll create the credential again with this particular thing. There we go. Oh, maybe it was this one, right? And then create this in the Azure container. Maybe I had the other one wrong. Okay, there we go. See if this works. Go. Okay. And eventually, you will create a database that's stuck to my local machine that actually exists in the cloud. And we can go up there and actually see the MDF and the LDF file. This is a Windows 2014 specific feature, and it's really not meant for this. What it's meant for is if you're running in an Azure VM, all of your data is going to be on the same storage account. But if you can do this from an Azure VM, I can put a database on storage account A and storage account B and storage account C. And remember, throttling is per storage account. Therefore, I don't believe this is for this kind of system at all. It's for the VM system where you can create databases all over the place. And actually, I should have done this on my VM. It was fairly fast. And see, there you go. And I can go up to my Azure storage in the west coast of the US, and I can see that there is indeed, he said, there we go, the database up there. And that's just a regular SQL Server database, according to SQL Server. It shows up in SQL Server Management Studio. I can back it up and restore it with real backups. But notice at this point it's upset. There we go, testDB. And so I can back it up. It knows what all its tables and everything else is, just like a regular database, okay? That, what I just did was sort of like a parlor trick. From a VM, it's actually useful. Okay. So because all your disks have to live in one storage account, that's a good idea because you can spread them across storage accounts. So some performance features are actually more useful in the cloud than on premises, like spreading the databases to multiple VHDs, or like being aggressive about SQL Server compression. Because this stuff is going to be up in the cloud, you want it to be compressed. And don't forget to enable instant file initialization, if you've ever heard of this. Instant file initialization basically says when you make a new database and it's this big, SQL Server will go and initialize each block with zeros. Instant file initialization, unless you work in a bank or something, you would do this, right? Says, I don't care. Just leave what's on the disk there. Just go empty, fine, right? And it makes the creates and the restores faster. And then consider RCSI. Again, RCSI is read committed snapshot. Azure VM backup and restore. Use backup compression for best results. And actually, you can back up to an Azure Blob URL. Let me do the parlor trick version of this for you. Right, I'm on my real machine. I have a pubs database. You would agree that this is on my real machine right here? Right here. It's on my real machine right here. And what I'm going to do is actually do a backup to a Windows Azure SQL database. So what we do for this is that I go to my storage container, and every storage container has, he said, where's storage container over here? Every storage container has, why did it lose all of its names? No, oh, fine, leave this page, I don't care. Every storage container has an access key. There's an access key right there. So if I click it, I can get the access key, and it's a big long key. You can copy and paste it in, and so what I did with this was I copied and pasted it in right here. Right, so, and create a credential off of that. So create a credential called my credential with identity equals, and this is the same as the storage account that you specify. Remember, I have one called BEAUCH. So let's try to do this with the European one, right? This is no fun to run canned stuff. Anybody can run canned stuff. So there's the one in Europe that I created this morning, right? We'll manage the access key for that. That's fine. Okay, we copied that. Now let's actually go and change this script to actually create a credential called my other credential. And what I want to do is I want to put the secret in here. By the way, nobody memorize this, please? There we go. Okay. And what I'll do is I'll create a credential off of that. I had too many cut and paste open at the same time there. Okay, so let's do that. And we'll create one called my credential X, or EU. England isn't part of the EU, though, is it? Or it doesn't participate in Europe, sorry. BEAUCHEU, and E was just for Europe, not the European Union. There. And we'll copy and paste this secret in here. Better be secret. I know somebody with a photographic memory has already memorized this. Okay, and we'll create another credential here. There we go. And now what we'll actually do, there we are, is to back our pubs database. Oh, Northwind. will back our Northwind database up to Europe. Now, we do have to have a container in Europe to make it do this. So let's create a container, he said. Okay, so how do we create a container? Choose your weapon, Bob. Okay, here's my storage account, containers. By the way, you can also do this in SQL Server Management Studio, believe it or not. I don't want to put it in the BHD container, so let's put it in one called backups. And it's a private container. Good. Okay, so it's going to create that. Oh, come on, there we go. It's not that slow. And then we'll make one called backups. So this is this EU blob.core.windows.net is okay. Backups, like that. Northwind.backup. Credential is my credential EU. There. And so, ready for this? This should be fairly fast because at least we're closer. It's still in the cloud. So let's see if it can go all the way to Ireland. Go. But see, it is running. So you know it just didn't fail because I screwed things up. And if I'd have got a login failure, I'd got it by now. So eventually we will have a Northwind backup in Ireland. There we go. We have one now. So now if my test Northwind database fails on the West Coast, I can get the one from Ireland to restore it. So this is real backup and restore. And by the way, this feature works as of SQL Server 2012, Service Pack 1 with some other weird feature after that. Right, so it is a 2012 feature. And by the way, if you want to trace that, turn on trace flag 3501 and it'll tell you if you have problems with it. It will tell you where on your SQL Server log. What's this really good for? For backing up if your VM or you're running on an Azure VM. Sorry. Don't forget to back up encryption because you don't want the NSA to read it, or MI6, are we up to MI6 now? Or Azure Blob Security. Notice this is being taped too. Somebody's going to come and get me tonight, right? So basically, if you put it up there without encryption, you're saying to the NSA, here's a copy of my data. Hope that you have it if I want to restore it. And then if you need to restore it, you call them up and they'll do point-in-time recovery for you. Okay. Check that instant file initialization is enabled. If restore is slow, it'll slow down and restore if you don't enable that as well. Okay. So the differences between Azure VM and on-premise is you do not choose your hardware brand on a VM. No SSDs, no SANs. They've talked about having SSDs, but not yet. Automatic patching and failover of the host OS, so there's some downtime involved. Again, you can ameliorate that downtime. FCI, which is failover cluster, not availability group, but failover cluster, is not yet technically supported. Availability groups are supported in SQL 14. And the differences between Azure VM and WASD, VM gives you complete compatibility with SQL Server on-premises. Your choice of version, all the features are available, subject to version, you pay for SQL Server, right? You are buying SQL Server. By the way, this is guaranteed not to upset the DBAs. Well, at least it won't upset them as much as the other one, right? And Windows Azure domain can be joined with the on-premises domain, really, right? So they have Azure Active Directory, and you can join your Active Directory with your Windows Azure Active Directory. So everybody can log on directly to the VM. It's like having a timeshare system in New York City or something. Okay, all SQL Server related products are available. So the problem with Azure, Windows Azure SQL Database is there's no SSIS, there's no SQL Agent, there's no any of this stuff. They're all there. Even Stream Insight is there, you could run it too. And instance level functionality is available. So similarities, both the SQL Server, both use commodity hardware, both can be helped by additional logging in your application. Both you should limit by IP address because they're both sitting up there on the cloud, right? And network latency should be a consideration for both because they're on the cloud. That's, of course, if you're serving your application from off the cloud. If you're serving your application from, in other words, if your website is on the cloud, that's really the place to put your database too. And both are more subject to connection failures. You have to retry on failure. And by the way, ADO.NET 4.51 and ODBC version 11 actually do automatic retry on connection failure. So, oh, I said that. Okay, never mind. And also JDBC 4.0, except they had to call it something more Unixy, so they called it Keep Alive and Retransmission in the registry. Also, there's an ADO.NET transient fault handling block, but If you have ADO.NET 4.5.1, you don't have to have the fault handling block because it's built in. However, with the fault handling block, you can actually have your own retry logic and your own retries. How many retries do you want to do? And hybrid solutions, well, you saw some of them, right? You can put a database in Azure Storage. You can back up to Azure Storage. There's another one I'm not going to do because I don't have any time left, but I wanted to show you this anyway, just to sort the code for it. So suppose I've made up my own Azure VM. Basically what you do is create a certificate, and then once you've created a certificate, you can say exec smartadmin set db backup. And basically what this does is it actually makes up a backup with a backup schedule for you that does a smart backup with differential backups. And you can tell it to do point-in-time recovery. Oh, actually, this is somebody else's example. I have an example, too, of my own. I know whose example this is. All right, yeah. It's Grant's. Okay. But it's fairly easy to change the names of the things, and it works the same way for me as it does for him. And Windows Azure Storage can also be geo-replicated. However, Windows Azure Storage with SQL databases doesn't support geo-replication. So you can go up here, and you can go to your storage account, and as part of my storage account to monitor, configure it, you can have it be geo-redundant. But geo-redundant doesn't work if you have an Azure VM on it. In other words, it's not going to fail over to some other geographic location and not hurt the VM at all. I mean, it won't hurt it, but it won't work. It won't continue to work. Okay. So, use case redux. In other words, the point of this talk was supposed to be when to use what. So, use SQL Azure in a VM when you have an existing application, you don't want to change it. You want to use features like SQL CLR, Service Broker, those are all available. Full compatibility, infrastructure level isolation, and the application will still be or can still be designed for scale up, right? You just buy more disks or you put your databases on different storage accounts. Windows Azure SQL database for new applications. If you have a brand new application and you're starting from scratch, these are the people that use this. And there's lower administration and management costs, right? You can just click on the thing and you have a database. And you have database level isolation because you really have something that looks like master, but isn't master. And you have no MSDB, you have a shared temp DB, and there is no model DB, right? And the database must be designed for scale out. And the only way to do scale out right now in SQL Server is to use sharding, which only exists on Windows Azure SQL Database. And the sharding that's built in, called Windows Azure Federations, doesn't work all that well. It's not as nice as they'd like to make it. So if you do a project with the SQL team, they actually have sharding code that will give you. And they told me they would publish this code for public consumption sometime in April. In other words, do your own sharding. Don't use the feature that's built in. So that's it. And I'm only 1 minute over. Does anybody have any questions? You saw all the scale out features. We backed up everything to a VM. I've got so much stuff out there, it'll probably cost me a whole $3 by the end of the night if I don't get rid of it. And now you know why people would do this. Thank you for coming, and I hope you enjoyed it. I now declare this day over. Right. Oh, by the way, as long as they're taping me, I'm supposed to tell you to use the app to do ratings of things, or if you don't have a, iPhone, use the, website. In fact, yesterday they just shipped SQL Server 2014, and so we were all waiting for it to download it so we would not put it on our machine to make sure it didn't ruin the conference. But I downloaded it, but the first thing I did was actually go look for it on Azure, because you must remember that the current CEO of Microsoft, the new one, is actually from Azure and from the server division. So you'd figure that he might want to put it on Azure first. So I want a VM, there's a VM, and hopefully it won't actually run off the page because this is fairly low resolution. And I'm going to create a new VM. There we go, right here. And then VM, you get a choice of quick create or a VM from the gallery. There's also a series of VMs that are contributed. The people contribute. They're Linux VMs, Linux-based, with various and sundry pieces of software on them. The reason they're Linux-based is, of course, people can't contribute VMs with their Windows OS on them because that's a bought product. And when you make one of these VMs, you pay so much a minute or so much an hour or something for the product. So from the gallery, I can basically choose one of these VMs, and son of a gun, they are finally up to SQL Server 2014. There it is. Is that visible okay? Can everybody see that all right? In the back? Yeah, maybe somewhat? Okay, good. So notice you can get just the data center or the OS. You can get one with a SharePoint trial on it, and you can get one with a Windows 2014 RTM, and that's the one I want. Let's just do that with Enterprise. There it is. And by the way, just so that you didn't really think I was making this up, I can also choose one with Visual Studio on it. So I've seen somebody that their Visual Studio got trashed right before the conference. So they took the demos, made a VM, uploaded them to the VM, and nobody knew better. And here's one for different Oracle VMs. So you can get an Oracle WebLogic server or an Oracle, database. So if you want to play with Oracle database and you don't want to bother to install it, by the way, they used to run setup on Windows. You can do it this way too. And basically they charge you so much by the minute. And then all the different Linux servers that you could possibly want. Okay, but what I want is I want one with SQL Server 2014 in it, because I'm going to get back to it later to show you how much like SQL Server it is. So I'll do that, pick that one. Oh, and I'm going to go scroll bar crazy, I bet. There we go. So where's the button, guys? There's supposed to be a button here that I can push now. Oh, I know, there's supposed to be a thing across the bottom. But because there it is, you see it? Because it's low resolution, I have to actually tap it like that. Oh, come on. Don't do Azure demos in low resolution, apparently, Bob. There, so you see the number be on my Azure Cloud Essentials subscription. And I don't want this in East US. I want this in Western Europe. Western Europe, Northern Europe. And this has to be someplace where you have a storage account. Because what they're going to do is they're going to make a VM with the VHD on your storage account. So it's going to make a VHD on your storage account. So that's why I made a storage account there, because I really didn't like the name that they gave my storage account before. And you can have something be an availability set. And what an availability set is that they do maintenance on the host OS, right? You're responsible for the guest OS, the VM, but they do maintenance on the host OS. And if you have more than one VM of the same type, and you put it in the same availability set, they will make sure that one of them is always up at a time. So if you have two of them, 1 and 2, basically when they go to do maintenance, they'll knock down 1 first, and then they'll bring it up and knock down 2 afterwards. So you always have at least 1. I'm only going to have 1, so I don't care. Okay. And then it's going to say, what ports do you want to open? And that's fine too. Oh, good. That even works. And it goes out. Excellent. Okay, so these are the default ports, and I'll leave them that way. You're also going to be able to VPN into the machine. So there we go. And so now it's actually, what is it upset about? It's creating it right there. And this little thing goes back and forth. Remember, if you zoom it, you stop everything on the box. Okay, so now it's creating that virtual machine. It's going to create it. And about 10 minutes later, I'll have a virtual machine. So when I go back to that, I'll actually have it when I need it, which is what the point of that was in the first place. Okay, great. So now what do I have to do? Oh, there's a slide deck involved, isn't there? Sorry. It's like I do all this in the third person. All right. So there's 4 main ways to run SQL Server. The first way is the way people usually think of when they want to run SQL Server, which is what? I have a computer, I install SQL Server on the computer, and I run SQL Server on the bare hardware. And that's the most common way that people run SQL Server as far as I know. And I've always run it that way, except I've run it on a virtual machine. So I actually run it most of the time the second way, which is SQL Server virtualized on premises. I do not have SQL Server actually run on my own machine. SQL Server always runs on VMs. And the reason for this is I'm actually running weird and sundry versions of SQL Server, and so I can just choose the VM and bring it up. Also, if I do something to trash the OS setup, then I just recover what I can and delete the virtual machine and it's gone. So SQL Server, it's 2 after 4, so we should start, or I should start. You're not allowed to take any pictures while I'm talking if you trash me. You can take pictures if you're nice. And yes, I did say that on camera. So there. So this is about me. Again, I work with a company called SQL Skills. If you've heard of SQL Skills, you've probably heard of my cohorts, who are Kimberly Tripp and Paul Randall, rather than myself. She's fairly famous, and they're fairly famous in the SQL Server space. I have email. You can write me an email with questions, and that's my Twitter account if you want to harass me in person. But if you trash the talk, include me on the list, right? Somebody did that this morning, and it's like, they didn't include me on the list. I found out the hard way. Okay, so I've written a bunch of books, and then one of the books got popular, and I went off to teach. Microsoft let me teach there for a while. And so I haven't written a book since then, except I did write the 2012 internals chapter in Caleb Mulaney's book last time. But if you were at the talk this morning, you already heard of that, and it's about me anyway. Let's start to talk about the talk. So I'm going to do a talk about SQL Server choices. And the premise is, at this point in time, if you're going to move the database to the cloud, which is the thing everybody always wonders if you're going to do, you have two choices. You have the choice to move to Microsoft Azure SQL Database. Remember, they just changed the name of that recently? So it used to be SQL Azure Database. Then it used to be Windows Azure SQL Database. Then last week they changed everything that was Windows Azure to Microsoft Azure. So the name of that product actually is Microsoft Azure SQL Database. But they've changed it so many times, I didn't change my slides this time yet. So there. And Microsoft Azure SQL Database is actually part of something called Platform as a Service. In this world, there's infrastructure as a service, which means we'll put up a bunch of VMs and let you have at it. There's platform as a service, which means we'll take part of our platform and commoditize it and put it out there, and you can subscribe to our service. And there's software as a service, which means you can write your own software and you can market it yourself. One of the things that I was fairly surprised to see is if you go out and make an Azure VM now, actually I wasn't surprised, I knew it was coming, you can make an Azure VM with Oracle on it. But having said that, because it takes maybe 10 or 15 minutes to make an Azure VM, and I wanted to actually show you both in real time, right? Let's actually go up and start the VM up, so when we need the VM, we're going to have it. So this is Azure, and I can actually log on that way. It may not ask me to log on because I told them to save my credentials, and indeed it doesn't. It's logging itself on now. I mean, it didn't ask me to log on. So you don't get the whole experience that way, right? So you go out and you can get a 30-day free trial. I'm not trying to plug this, right? You go out and you can get a 30-day free trial. And with a 30-day free trial, you can log on. And I don't even know if you have to have your credit card anymore. You used to have your credit card. But you can log on for 30 days and you can do whatever you want with it. When you get that, it's tied to your Windows account. If you have Windows 8, you know what a Windows account is. It used to be your live account. So it's tied to your Windows account. So what it normally would do is actually put up my Windows account username and tell me to log in with my Windows account password. And so once you're up in Azure, you can own things in Azure. And so this is a list of all the, give me 2 seconds. There. This is a list of all the things that I own in Azure right now. So I own a storage account called BBAUCH, that's my first initial and my last name. Oh, come on, don't do that, Mr. Zoom In. And the storage account is actually on a subscription I have, and it's located in the West US, which is where I live. But I knew I was going to be teaching here, speaking here, and so I made up one, BBAUCHUEU, and that one is actually in the same subscription, and it's in Ireland. Northern Europe is Ireland to them, and Western Europe, I believe, is Amsterdam. I forget where all their different, data centers is. Well, it's as west as they go, right? Okay. So storage accounts are just where you put files. And then I also have a second account. So I actually got free accounts. If you have MSDN, you actually have a free account, and I'm actually part of a partner program where I get a free account. I shouldn't say that on camera. They're going to go, you have too many free accounts. But for MSDN, you get a free account with $150 free worth every month. And the nice thing about that is that in preparing for this stuff, I have to be up there all the time. And I've never really used more than $15 or $20 a month. So I didn't even come close. And if you have a free account or a trial account, you can have it say, if I run out of money, just don't do any more for money, right? Cut my account off at that point. So anyway, I'm not trying to plug it, I'm trying to tell you how it works, right? I'm not going to do value judgment. Okay. And I also have, and I don't know, they did this without my knowledge, and I'm not paying for it, an Active Directory account for the SQL Skills Active Directory domain, which is interesting because I didn't know there was one. And that's actually shared by all the SQL Skills people, and it's in the US. Okay. So one of the choices you have right now is to run SQL Server on a virtual machine at the bottom. So I should be able to hit this and go on to the next page. Or you're not going to be, oh, it's going to be cranky too. All right. So what I will actually do is, because I can do it, well, yeah. If this doesn't work right away, this is the last time I do it, because I don't want to have this session consist of seeing you struggle, just watching you watch me struggle with the Azure GUI. And I could do this in PowerShell, but I haven't set up the PowerShell scripts to do it yet. So let's see if we can bounce the resolution down on the real machine. So this is even down further than it was. They said the real machine was going to be small this way, but you know, if you can't see the GUI, it ain't going to work real well. There, and so I got that. Now if I go over here, it'll make me log on and log off. Oh no, it was happy to just keep me up there. Okay, and then what I want to do is go up to Azure again. Cool. Okay, now I should be able to scroll down here. Come on, scroll button. That's not nice at all. So can I lose some menu bars and stuff? There's a menu bar.
Let me zoom out, zoom in the browser.
Oh, maybe so it'll do that. Okay, there's zoom out and there's zoom in. And I can even turn zooming off if that's the issue.
You're pressing F11.
Sorry?
F11, press
F11? Okay. Okay, there's F11. Oh, there it is. Thank you. Okay, now you're going to have to tell me how to get out of this. You can tell that I don't usually run at low resolution.
You just press F11 again.
F11 again to get out of it? Okay. So I've chosen, thank you, I've chosen Enterprise Edition again, and it wants me to go to the next page. There. So we're at the next page, so it asks me, what do you want to call the virtual machine? And I always call them after me. I'll have to change it after this conference though. And you can get a choice of sizes. And so they give you so many cores and so much memory. And by the way, there's a really nice thing that says, if you need more virtual machine, it just automatically gets it for you up to a certain size. And again, you can get up to 8 cores and 56 gigabyte of memory. So I'll just get the smallest one because I'm just going to illustrate things. You pay for these things by the minute. And then this is the user that's the administrator of the machine and the user password. And I'm not doing the Hadoop demo till tomorrow. I found out that the Hadoop scoop part of Hadoop, that's basically the equivalent of bulk copy in SQL Server, does not like passwords with exclamation points in them. This is a known limitation. It's like, really? Okay, so anyway, there's the configuration there. And it goes on to the next page. Thank you so much for the F11, by the way. And you're going to create a cloud service you need to manage it. And there's the cloud service DNS name, and that's fine. I want it to